$1,000 is a strange amount of money. It is too much to feel trivial and too little to feel transformative. It is enough to create the sensation of possibility, the brief, quiet thought that something could be done with this, but not enough to make the path from here to anywhere significant feel obvious or immediate. And so, for most people, $1,000 sits in a checking account, in a savings account, in a mental category called I should do something with this eventually that never quite resolves into action. Two people, both have $1,000 today. Both are 30 years old, earning similar incomes, operating under similar financial constraints. One of them, at 45, has crossed $100,000 in invested assets and is experiencing for the first time what it feels like to have a portfolio that generates meaningful returns without requiring her constant contribution to maintain its momentum. The other, at 45, still has approximately $1,000 in savings, sometimes more, sometimes less, and has spent 15 years in a cycle of accumulation and depletion that has produced no lasting financial progress, despite genuine effort and reasonable income. The difference between them is not what they knew. Both of them understood, intellectually, that investing early matters and compound interest builds wealth over time. The difference is the specific sequence of decisions made with that initial $1,000 and every subsequent decision that followed from it. A sequence that one of them got right and the other got wrong, not because of intelligence or discipline or financial sophistication, but because nobody showed the second person the exact steps clearly enough in the right order to make the path from 1,000 to 100,000 feel navigable rather than theoretical. My name is Anderson, and today I want to show you those exact steps not in the vague, aspirational language that most financial content uses, but with the specific sequencing, the real numbers, and the behavioral mechanics that determine whether $1,000 becomes the foundation of something real or remains a number that cycles in and out of your account without ever compounding into anything. Step 1. Understand what $1,000 actually is. Before the first dollar moves anywhere, the single most important shift is perceptual rather than practical, and it is this. $1,000 is not a spending resource waiting for a worthy purpose. It is a compounding seed that will either be planted or consumed, and those are the only two options available to it. This distinction sounds obvious, but it is not felt as obvious by most people holding $1,000 in a checking account because the checking account communicates availability. Money in a checking account is available money. Available money is spending money. And spending money in the presence of the daily financial pressures of a real life finds its way toward consumption through 100 individually reasonable decisions that collectively ensure the $1,000 never becomes anything other than $1,000. The perceptual shift required is treating the $1,000 as already allocated not to a specific investment, but to the category of future wealth before any decision about its use is made. This is not a meditation exercise. It is a structural decision that must be followed immediately by a physical action. Moving the money to a separate account at a separate institution before the checking account's availability logic has any further opportunity to operate on it. $1,000 moved to a high-yield savings account at a different bank today is $1,000 that has been physically removed from the spending decision space. It now exists in a different psychological category, not because the person has stronger willpower, but because the institutional separation creates friction that converts impulsive access into deliberate access. And deliberate access, unlike impulsive access, is usually declined once the urgency of the impulse has passed. Step 2. Establish the protection layer before the growth layer. This is the step that most financial content skips entirely in its eagerness to talk about investment accounts and compound returns. And it is the step whose absence causes more people to fail at the journey from 1,000 to 100,000 than any other single factor. The $1,000 cannot go directly into the investment account, not yet. Because the investment account, once established, must be protected from disruption, and disruption, for most people in the early stages of wealth building, comes from the absence of a liquid buffer between their financial life and the unexpected expenses that arrive with reliable regularity. Here is the mathematics of why this sequencing matters. The average working adult experiences a financial shock requiring between $500 and $2,000 approximately once every 14 to 18 months. A car repair, a medical expense, a home appliance failure, a period of reduced income. Without a liquid buffer, this shock lands on the investment account either through direct withdrawal or through the suspension of contributions, while the shock is absorbed through income. And suspended contributions at the early stage of wealth building, when the portfolio is entirely dependent on human input for its forward momentum, cost more in timeline than the dollar value of the suspension suggests. $1,000 in a high-yield savings account earning 4 to 5% is not an investment. It is a shield. It is the structural layer that allows the investment account, once established in step 3, to run without interruption because the interruptions that would otherwise reach the investment account are absorbed by the buffer before they arrive. The target for the buffer is 3 months of genuine living expenses. If your monthly expenses are $3,000, the buffer target is $9,000. $1,000 is a meaningful start toward that target, not the completion of it. And the sequence is to build the buffer first, to whatever level makes the investment account genuinely protected, before directing any capital toward the investment account itself. This feels counterintuitive to people who are eager to begin compounding, but the compounding that runs uninterrupted for 10 years because the buffer absorbed every shock that would have disrupted, it is worth dramatically more than the compounding that begins immediately and is interrupted repeatedly because the protection layer was never established. If this sequencing is showing you something about your own financial structure that you have not seen clearly before, take 2 seconds and hit the like button. It genuinely helps this reach more people at the beginning of this journey. Step 3, open the investment account and make the first move. Once the buffer exists or is being systematically built toward its target, the investment account is the next structure to establish. And here the decisions are fewer and simpler than most people expect, because the financial content industry has created the impression that investment account setup requires expertise, research, and a sophisticated understanding of market mechanics that most people do not possess. It does not. It requires 3 decisions made once that do not need to be revisited for years. The first decision is the institution, a low-cost brokerage, Fidelity, Vanguard, or Schwab, with no account minimum, no trading commissions, and a wide selection of index funds. The institution matters less than the fee structure. Choose the one whose interface feels most navigable and whose expense ratios are competitive. This decision takes 30 minutes of research and 1 hour to implement. The second decision is the fund, a single broad market index fund, a total stock market fund, or an S&P 500 fund with an expense ratio below 0.1%, not 5 funds. Not a carefully balanced allocation of domestic and international bonds and REITs. 1 fund. The diversification that more complex allocations provide is real but marginal at portfolio sizes below $50,000, and the behavioral complexity of managing multiple funds at the early stage creates decision fatigue that reliably produces worse outcomes than the simplicity of a single holding. The third decision is automation. A monthly contribution, whatever the budget allows after the buffer building transfer, is accounted for, scheduled to transfer on payday. Not the day after payday, on payday. Before the daily spending pattern has claimed the income as its own. The initial $1,000, once the buffer account has received its allocated portion, goes directly into this fund, not waiting for the right market moment, not held in cash inside the brokerage while research continues. Invested in the fund immediately because time in the market consistently outperforms timing the market across every historical period for which data exists. Step 4. Engineer the contribution rate that reaches 100,000. $1,000 invested today at 7% annual returns with no additional contributions reaches approximately $4,000 in 20 years. That is the power of compounding operating on a single seed with no additional input. It is real and it is meaningful, but it is not the path from 1,000 to 100,000. The path from 1,000 to 100,000 requires a monthly contribution that, combined with the initial seed and compounding returns, reaches the target within a financially meaningful timeline, and the specific contribution required depends on the timeline you are working with. To reach $100,000 in 10 years, starting with $1,000 today, requires a monthly contribution of approximately $550 at 7% annual returns. To reach the same target in 7 years requires approximately $830 monthly. To reach it in 15 years requires approximately $300 monthly. The right target is the one that is achievable given your actual income and actual expenses, not the one that sounds most impressive. A $300 monthly contribution held consistently for 15 years produces $100,000. An $800 monthly contribution held for 3 years before collapsing under its own unsustainability produces approximately $32,000, and a person who has concluded that building wealth is harder than it should be. Sustainability is the variable that most people optimize last and should optimize first. The contribution rate that reaches $100,000 is the contribution rate you can maintain without significant lifestyle disruption across every month of the journey, including the difficult months, the expensive months, the months when motivation has faded, and the account balance still feels too small to be worth the sacrifice. And if you're genuinely finding this valuable, consider subscribing. Every week I make videos like this, specific, mathematically honest, built for the person who is actually trying to build something real. Step 5. Protect the compounding from the 3 enemies that will try to stop it. The journey from 1,000 to 100,000 has 3 enemies that are more dangerous than market volatility, more expensive than poor fund selection, and more common than any financial advisor will tell you. They are not dramatic. They are ordinary. And their ordinariness is precisely what makes them so effective at derailing trajectories that were mathematically sound. The first enemy is the lifestyle upgrade time to income growth. Every time income increases, a raise, a promotion, a career move, there is a window of approximately 30 to 60 days before the lifestyle calibrates to the new income level. In that window, the entire after-tax income increase is available to be redirected to the investment contribution before the new baseline is established. Most people miss this window. They receive the raise, feel the improvement in monthly cash flow, and allow the lifestyle to expand to meet the new income before the investment contribution has been adjusted. The raise disappears into the expanded baseline without leaving a trace in the investment account. The specific protection against this enemy is a rule established before the raise arrives. 50% of every after-tax monthly income increase goes directly to raising the automated investment contribution on the day the new income level takes effect, not 50% of whatever is left after the lifestyle has adjusted. 50% of the full increase moved immediately before the baseline has shifted. This single rule, applied consistently across 3 or 4 income events over a decade, can cut the timeline from 1,000 to 100,000 by 2 to 4 years without any additional sacrifice. The second enemy is the contribution suspension during market downturns. When the investment account drops 15 or 20%, and it will, multiple times between 1,000 and 100,000, there is a powerful psychological impulse to pause contributions until the situation stabilizes. This impulse feels like prudence. It is mathematically catastrophic. The months when the market is down are the months when the contribution purchases more units of the fund for the same dollar amount. Pausing contributions during downturns is equivalent to deciding not to buy something on sale because the price has dropped. A behavioral inversion of rational purchasing logic that costs the investor meaningful compounding at precisely the moment when the compounding opportunity is greatest. The protection against this enemy is a written commitment made before the first downturn arrives that contributions continue regardless of portfolio performance. Not a mental note, a written policy that specifies contribution continuity as a non-negotiable rule. The rule exists because downturns are conditions in which decision-making is compromised by emotional reactivity, and a policy established in advance holds more reliably than a decision made in the middle of a declining portfolio. The third enemy is the early withdrawal for a lifestyle upgrade. At somewhere between $30,000 and $60,000, the portfolio reaches a size that starts feeling like a resource. The kitchen renovation, the car upgrade, the down payment supplement. These uses feel legitimate, and some of them are, but each withdrawal removes not just the withdrawn amount, but the compounding that withdrawn amount would have generated for the remaining years of the journey. $20,000 withdrawn at a portfolio value of $50,000 does not delay the timeline to $100,000 by $20,000 divided by monthly contribution. It delays it by the compounding that $20,000 would have generated, which, across the remaining years of the journey, can represent $50,000 to $70,000 in foregone portfolio value. The protection is treating the investment account as a one-way valve until $100,000 is reached. Money enters, money does not exit. This is not a permanent rule after $100,000. The portfolio has developed enough momentum that the mathematics of withdrawal change significantly, but during the journey from $1,000 to $100,000, the one-way valve is the structural commitment that allows the compounding to run without the interruptions that reset the timeline. Here is what to do today before anything else. Move the $1,000, or whatever your current starting amount is, to a high-yield savings account at a separate institution, not as an investment. As a buffer-building action and a physical separation from the checking account's availability logic, this happened today. This week, calculate your 3-month expense buffer target and establish an automated monthly transfer toward it. Then open a brokerage account at a low-cost institution and select a single broad market index fund. Do not invest yet if the buffer is not complete, but establish the account and the fund selection so the infrastructure exists. This month, calculate the monthly contribution rate that reaches $100,000 in your target timeline and set up the automation. Write your 2 rules: contribution continuity through downturns and one-way valve until $100,000. Somewhere you will see them when the conditions that test them arrive. Let me bring you back to where we started. 2 people, $1,000 each. Both are 30 years old. 15 years later, a gap in net worth approaching $90,000 appears from the outside to require a complex explanation. The explanation is not complex. One of them followed a specific sequence, moved the money immediately, built the buffer before the investment account, established a sustainable contribution rate, protected the compounding from the 3 enemies, and let time do what time does when given an adequately structured financial foundation to work with. The other understood the theory, knew that investing early matters and compound interest builds wealth, had the same $1,000 and the same 15 years, but never translated the understanding into the specific, sequenced actions that convert intellectual knowledge into an actual portfolio, and at 45, is still in the place of knowing what should be done without having yet done it. $1,000 is not a small amount, it is not a large amount. It is a starting amount, the first seed of a journey whose outcome is determined almost entirely by the sequence of decisions made in the first 90 days after it exists. You know the sequence now. The $1,000 is either already in your account or will be soon. The only remaining question is what happens to it in the next 90 days, and that question has never been more answerable than it is right now. Thanks for listening. My name is Anderson, and I'll see you in the next video.